Letter 5. The caretaker left the door open. And this time I walked in and stayed. Watch a 3-year-old at play. Not directed play, not structured activity, just a child, left to their own devices, in a space where they feel safe and supported. What you see is something most of us have forgotten we once were. Completely absorbed, fully present. The world is a playground and their imagination has no edges. They're not thinking about whether what they're doing is correct or whether someone will approve of it. They are simply in it, completely, effortlessly, without self-consciousness or self-doubt. I've been on playground duty as a teacher more times than I can count. And one thing I witnessed over and over across 32 years and hundreds of children was this. When children play freely, they enter a state of complete presence that most adults spend years trying to recreate through meditation, breathwork, and mindfulness practice. And when you ring the bell at the end of playtime, you can watch them being physically jolted back into the world. The transition is visible. Something closes. We all began there. The question this letter asks is, what happened between then and now? The narrowing. It happens gradually. So gradually that nobody notices it's happening. Not the children, not the teachers, not the parents. Adults begin making judgments, not always consciously or unkindly, often with the best intentions. But children are extraordinary absorbers of the frameworks around them. They notice what gets praised and what gets corrected, what earns a place on a display on the wall and what gets a gentle redirection, what is considered creative and what is considered, however gently, not quite right. And slowly, carefully, they begin to colour within the lines. Not because anyone told them to, because they learnt to. I remember a lesson, and I've seen versions of it in countless classrooms, where children were studying the work of Monet. They looked at his paintings, discussed his techniques, and then were asked to create a painting in his style. It was a well-intentioned lesson. Monet is extraordinary, and learning to look carefully at the work of a master painter is genuinely valuable. But what the lesson taught was imitation. It did not teach a child to stand in a space and find their own language for what they saw. It did not ask, "What do you notice? How does this make you feel? What would you do with paint if nobody had ever shown you what a painting was supposed to look like?" A classroom that truly honours creativity does not identify good art or bad art. Art is art. It is an important expression of the artist. A creative culture gives children and young people the freedom to choose the medium through which they want to speak. Paint, clay, movement, words, music, construction, or code. the medium matters less than the act of authentic expression. And authentic expression, by definition, cannot be wrong. I say this as someone who spent 32 years in education. I'm not criticising teachers. Teaching is one of the most demanding, most meaningful things a person can do. I am describing what systems do. Systems standardise, and standardisation, applied to creativity, slowly and quietly extinguishes it. The grand piano. I need to tell you about a piano. It was in a large hall in the building closest to the halls of residence, where I lived during my first year of university. A grand piano, in an empty room, largely unused in the evenings. The caretaker, and I've never forgotten this small act of kindness, used to leave the room open for a little while so that I could play. I was studying for a teaching degree, but looking back at the first year, the moments that mattered, the ones I can still feel, were not the teaching experiences. They were the evenings at that piano. They were the compositions I wrote for the university dance students inspired by Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. They were the acting, the performing, the making. As the year came to a close, I began asking about the possibility of transferring from the B.Ed to the B.A. music degree. It was possible. I just needed to plan and deliver a recital to the academic music staff. I didn't do it. There were voices, other people's voices mostly, about the insecurity of a career in music, about the reliability of teaching, about practicality and stability and the sensible path. I was very young, and I was not yet used to making decisions that contradicted the people around me. I didn't yet know how to say, I know what you're saying is reasonable, but I know what I need. So I continued on the teaching degree path, and the grand piano stayed where it was. I want to be clear about something. Teaching gave me 32 years of profound meaning. Watching children grow, learn, and find themselves is one of the greatest privileges I've known. And my family, the life I built, has been the most rewarding experience of my life. I do not tell this story with bitterness or regret, but I tell it honestly, because I think many people reading this will recognize something in it. The moment when the voices of others were louder than their own. The choice that made sense on paper. The room they didn't walk into. Travelling back. It was only recently that I discovered the musician Jacob Collier. If you don't know his work, Jacob Collier is, and I'm not sure any description quite does it justice, someone who dismantled every rule of traditional music theory and rebuilt something entirely his own. He grew up in a house full of music, taught himself to play almost every instrument, and developed a harmonic language so rich and so free that it defies easy categorization. He never stopped asking why, and he never accepted, because that's how it's done, as a sufficient answer. Discovering his music felt like watching someone play in a garden with no fences. Something shifted when I encountered his work. The barriers I had built, through classical piano lessons, through exam systems, through decades of believing there was a correct way to do things musically, began to feel less permanent. Not wrong exactly, The foundations they gave me are genuinely valuable, but containing. And on the other side of them, I began to glimpse something that felt, in the most unexpected way, familiar. Here is what I've come to understand, and I think it might be the most important thing I've learnt in the last few years. I am travelling back. Not forward towards some more sophisticated version of creativity, back towards something I had before the frameworks arrived. Back towards the 3-year-old on the playground, fully absorbed, without self-consciousness, making something simply because the making itself was enough. The classical training is still there. The decades of teaching, of structure, of discipline, still there. But now they serve the creativity rather than containing it. The caretaker left the room open, and this time I walked in and stayed. What we were before. That child, the 3-year-old, fully present, imagination boundless, no framework for good or bad, is still inside every adult who reads this. Still there, beneath everything that was built on top of them. Still capable of complete absorption in a creative act. Still able to make something without needing it to be right. The question is not whether we can return to that. I believe we can. I am in the process of doing it myself, slowly, imperfectly, with a long way still to go. The question is simply whether we'll give ourselves permission to try. What would you make, but write, play or build if nobody was going to judge it? If there was no framework for good and bad, no Monet to imitate, no voices telling you about security and practicality and the sensible path. If the caretaker left the room open and nobody was watching, maybe start there. Until next Monday, Neil.